I want to introduce Regan Brumagen from the Rakow Library. Thank you very much, Regan, for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Margaret. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks everybody for coming out. I'm going to take just a second to share my screen. So, well, good evening or good afternoon, depending on the time zone. Sounds like we have people from all over the place. Thanks again so much for coming. And I love talking about Pyrex. It was one of my favorite research projects since I started at the museum 20 years ago as a librarian. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Pyrex exhibition that was called America's Favorite Dish, and about the stories of women within the production of Pyrex, mostly this evening, and focused around the collection of Diane Williams, who was, maybe some of you know, kind of renowned in the collecting community of Pyrex, and referred to as the Pyrex lady for her vast collection, which came to us in 2010. So those are kind of the things that I'm going to talk about, as well as how you can access our library to do your own research on Pyrex. So you may be wondering why the focus on women. And that's a great question, because obviously lots of people were involved in the production of Pyrex of all genders. It just seemed to us when we were working on the exhibition 10 years ago now, that women had a very profound role throughout the production process of Pyrex, and we wanted to feature that in the exhibition. And some of my favorite stories relate to women, but there are all kinds of great stories relating to Pyrex, of course. So we are going to focus on that tonight, but I'm also going to talk in general just about collections at the museum that relate to Pyrex and collections at the library that relate to Pyrex. So before we jump into that, I just want to tell you a little bit. If you haven't visited the museum or the Rakow Library, please come see us. We'd love to have you. And I'll talk about ways you can connect with us remotely too, if getting to Corning is too challenging, which it can be. Corning's a tiny little city. But I did want to clear up a little bit of confusion that people often have about the Corning Museum of Glass. Corning is in a town called Corning, and there is a company called Corning, and of course the museum called Corning. So it's all very confusing, but the museum is actually a separate entity from Corning Incorporated. Corning Incorporated has its own research lab, its own archives, its own library. So although the museum was founded by the Houghtons, who were the founding family of Corning Incorporated, it is a nonprofit educational institution. So that's just something that often is confusing to people. And sometimes there's a confusion about the types of collections we have, because we're the Corning Museum of Glass. Do we only collect Corningware or Corning products? And actually our collections are pretty encyclopedic. So we have anything from ancient glass to contemporary artists who use glass as a medium for expression. And that applies to the museum as well as to the library. Both institutions were founded in 1951, and they're both pretty much the largest collections of glass-related objects and literature in the world. So we're open to the public. The library does not charge for admission. The museum obviously does. So there are a few differences in between those two things, but we welcome visitors to both institutions. And if you have questions about the institution, please reach out. I'm happy to answer them. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, because obviously everybody came here to hear about Pyrex. So that's what we're going to do. So as I mentioned, I'm going to focus a lot on a really special collection to us that we got in 2010, acquired from Diane Williams, the Pyrex lady. You know, put in the chat if you've ever heard of her or met her, or she's quite well known in the collecting community. She had a goal of collecting every piece of production Pyrex that was made. And when she did an interview with us in 2015, she said the only pieces of production, let me read, that she lacked were the oldest baby bottle, an iced tea set, and an electric iron. And she was pretty sure she had collected every other piece of production Pyrex that was produced. And she verified that by doing research at the Corning Ink Archives a couple of times to document her collection. And this is one of her favorite pieces in the library collection, this piece of advertising ephemera. So the glass collection, it's a pretty amazing acquisition. There were about 1,400 items, but that doesn't include duplicates or accessories, which includes lids and frames and baskets. So when you total it all up, it's more like over 2,000 pieces, discrete pieces. And it came to us through the efforts of another pretty amazing, remarkable woman, our curator for contemporary glass at the time, Tina Oldnow. And Tina had a really great love of Pyrex and really championed this collection. She said, that this was so important to the museum because not only Pyrex with its, local ties, we're in Corning, our founding family was, Corning's founding family, but also, this is like such, everybody has a piece of Pyrex in their kitchen, right? It's like irrevocably in our kitchens in America. And she also, said that the influence of Pyrex design internationally in the 20th century was deep and lasting. And in her eyes, the Pyrex measuring cup was as recognizable a symbol as the Coke bottle in American design. So I think that's a pretty strong statement there. Coke bottle is one of our iconic images, right? Here are some of the images from Diane's collection, and I'll show a couple more, but a few more. These were all items that appeared in our exhibition. And then a little bit of data. It's really hard with this size of collection to get specific statistics, but you can see kind of the overall bulk of the collection is baking ware. We have bowls next, and then cups and serving dishes. And again, the accessories, which are the lids, the frames, the baskets, and that kind of thing, on down to the very instructive other. So there's a lot in this collection. Just some little fun facts about it. Since measuring cups were one of Tina's favorite things, I picked out, we got 17 from Diane from 1925 to 1983, but we do have other Pyrex in the collection that came from other sources, so I don't want to minimize that. We got some from Jerry Wright, who was an employee at Corning, and from other Corning employees mostly. We also got a Pyrex measuring cup mold, which I love because it looks like a little porcupine. I don't know, it looks unlike any other mold I've seen, so I'm not really sure. Maybe someone in the audience knows why it has those little things sticking out. I need to follow up and ask about that, but it's so adorable. Also really, really heavy. Lots of pie plates. You can see here the deep dishes, the Desert Dawn, the engraved one with the lid at the bottom. Big variety. Custard cups and another mold. And the molds were given to us by World Kitchen. They had a number in their collection that they were going to scrap. And so they gave us a couple for the exhibition and then donated them to our collection. Flameware, the top of stove, alumina silica formula that was introduced in the 30s. We have, over 25 objects from that line. Lots of coffee and teapots. I couldn't get a good number on this one because there's so many words for coffee pots, carafes and percolators and coffee makers and coffee pots. So it was really hard, but there are a lot. And again, Diane tried to collect one of every production piece. And then of course, lots of opalware, over 700 opalware objects. And then, being a librarian, the library collection is obviously something that I've used a lot, been very close to. Diane's collection had a lot of advertisements and ephemera, like that big display that I showed you in the beginning. She also had an unpublished manuscript, which I will talk about later, and is one of my favorite pieces in her collection. Then we have some other collections that relate to Pyrex that I'll talk about just a little bit. I put this one in for you, Margaret, because Margaret loves teapots and blueprint designs. So this is from our Frederick Carter papers, and he was one of the he was the founding manager of the Steuben Glass Company, and then went on to become an art director at Corning in the 1930s. And so we have some of his designs that he worked on that relate to Pyrex, including this teapot. And they're really beautiful in a very functional way. I love them. We have a lot of, even though we're not the library for Corning Incorporated, we have a lot of Corning documentation, like some of the employee newsletters. We have some of their annual reports, some of their research reports, things like that, some old photographs, and a variety of things that relate to Corning. Lots and lots of trade catalogs. It's one of our premier collections, and a lot of Corning trade catalogs. And many of these have been digitized and are fully accessible online, no matter where you are. So I'll show you how to access those at the end of the presentation. Then we have a collection from World Kitchen called the World Kitchen Media and Design Records. And it's really a lot of TV and radio ads. It does have a lot of other stuff, and it's much later in date than a lot of Diane Williams materials. So you get a lot of other Corning lines like Visions and Corel and Corningware. So I thought I'd play you a little old school television ad that Corning used to promote how durable its Pyrex cups were. Yep, there's the cup. Undamaged. And you keep thinking, oh, this is going to be over. But no, they keep doing more things with the cup. It's like the best tool ever. It bends, it straightens, it hammers. And I even clipped this and it keeps going. But it's really a lot of fun. They did a lot of fun strength kinds of filming with their products. So on to Diane Williams' collection. Again, primarily advertising. So this ad was in there. It's one of the first ads for Pyrex, if not the first ad. And it was October 1915 in Good Housekeeping magazine. You can see the fire glass listed under Pyrex, glass dishes for baking. The image at the top shows the pieces that they have for sale, and then on the left, you can see from our glass collection, we assembled similar pieces for the exhibition to kind of show what those pieces look like. She has them from every decade, 1920s to the 1980s, and they're a lot of fun. Ads are one of my favorite things in the collection. I really like the one on the left. It says, you probably can't read it, so I'll read you a piece of it. Is this genuine Pyrex, says the woman, with only two possible answers. And this was intended for an ad for salespeople, not consumer direct. So yes, as you can tell by the name pressed into the dish, or no, but, and then the ad goes on to say, the wise dealer knows it is better to sell genuine Pyrex than to sell butts. I just like the cleverness there. But I always laugh at some of these early ads because there's so much text and it's so very different than what we're used to. The 1930s, we have the introduction of flameware, and they have really fun visual images of shooting flames to, to tell people, yes, you can put your dishes on top of the stove. But also this fun image that has a lot going on, but it's the giant eye, one of many miracles in glass. And I like, it tells you something about how Corning perceived, the dishware really fit in at that moment to their idea of scientific advancement. This was like the science of the home, And then the giant eye was like the science, that was letting us see into the future and into space. So they felt like they were related, and I think that's clear in this ad. The 1940s and the 1950s are just fun, colorful, dynamic advertising. I don't know if it was like the time or the end of World War II or improvements in printing, but they're just so colorful. I mean, obviously the introduction of color into the glassware made a huge difference as well. So you had to have those color ads to be able to see how visually appealing this glassware was. And then the 1960s, you've got the introduction of Terra, but also you can see in the middle ad, kind of reflecting people's obsession with space. So there's Horizon Blue, looking out. 70s, Corel and Woodland Pyrex compatibles. The interesting ads on either side of the top. Pyrex ware still worth discovering, kind of indicating it's some fading interest maybe in the 70s for Pyrex. So the ads are very telling. And then the last decade that she really collected was 1980s. And you have the stackable measuring cups. And I love the little talking butter dish there. Great. So I said that one of my favorite pieces in her library collection was the manuscript. And it's not one that most people have had a chance to use, but I hope that we'll be able to get it online one day and more people can take a look at it. But it is an unpublished manuscript with all of her research encapsulated in it. And it's phenomenal. It's probably the most used reference I have had in the 20 years that I have worked there. So part 1 is transparent ovenware and flameware, and then plain and decorated opalware. And then part 3 is all the other stuff. And if you're a big fan of Excel spreadsheets, there are lots of spreadsheets. And I gave you an example here showing how she would list all the catalog numbers and then the ranges of the dates that they were produced and the patterns that they were produced in. So it's just a superb collection. It's too bad that it was never published. There's some still unfinished parts of it, so it's not something that could be published as is, but hopefully we can digitize it one day and at least make what's there available to people. But in the meantime, we do send out chapters to people who ask us questions, and we find the relevant information in there and then mail it out as a PDF. So once we had this phenomenal collection, we really had to do something with it to share it with the public. So we conceived of an exhibition in honor of the 100 years of Pyrex, which happened back in 2015. We digitized a ton of trade catalogs and advertisements in advance of the exhibition. And we also created an accompanying website called Pyrex Potluck, which was built really based on Diane's research, most of it. We wrote a bunch of blog articles and, posted a lot of online information at that time. And here are just a couple of screenshots showing the exhibition as it was in 2015. One side was all glass and ads that were reproduced in between. You could see the molds in the middle. The other side was the little story vignettes that some of my talk is based upon. And then at the very end, we had this giant blow up of the test kitchen, which people love to pose in front of. It's a great photo opportunity. And the test kitchen was such an integral part of its success that we thought that was a really cool thing to have in the exhibition. So I'm sure many of you have already heard the origin story. I won't spend too much time on it. But for those of you who haven't, it's that Corning, before they developed Pyrex, was trying to solve basically a problem that the railroads had in signal lanterns, that the lantern would get hot and it would hit cold or snow in the air and it would shatter. And so they needed some kind of glass that was thermal shock resistant. And so they spent time developing what they called non-X. And it was a very successful product. the railroads bought it and it solved their problems, and that was great. Unfortunately for Corning, it was also really sturdy, so they kind of dealt themselves out of a business there because they weren't able to sell very many after everybody had bought their signal lanterns. So there wasn't a lot of growth in that afterwards. So they were looking for another way to use this thermal shock resistant glass. And Jesse Littleton, who was a physicist, started around 1913. And he was one of the researchers who was given the task of trying to figure out what new products could be made with non-X. So the legend, and again, I have no idea, this has been repeated many, many times, but I really don't know if it's true or not, or how much of it is true. I'm sure there's definitely a lot of truth to it. But according to the company, Bessie, or Becky, as she was known to many, were discussing the problem over dinner with friends. And Bessie said, well, maybe you could bake in it, because she had just had one of her ceramic dishes explode in the oven. And she thought maybe this thermal shock resistant glass would solve that problem. So Jesse brought home a sawed off battery jar in the shape of a cake pan, and Bessie successfully cooked a sponge cake in it. And then she experimented with other things. Like I'd read somewhere that he brought home the tops of lamp chimneys and she cooked custards in them, and some other things as well. So there was a lot of experimentation going on. And then, of course, once they decided this was, something that was promising, they had to develop a formula that would be safe for food, because non-X had lead in it, and that was not going to be okay for baking things. So the scientists perfected the formula, and they were ready to introduce it to America, but they weren't sure America was really ready for Pyrex, because cooking with glass, baking with glass was such a novel concept. People were afraid the glass would break or melt if they put it in the oven. So it was really kind of a shift in thinking that they had to make happen in order to make their glass saleable. So they, of course, knew women would be their main consumers. So a lot of the early ads feature women. This is Catherine Huber, or Huber. I'm not really sure how her name is pronounced. She was one of the early faces of the Pyrex ads, and she happened to be a secretary at the company. And they just scooped her up because she was photogenic, I think, and said, here, be in our ads. So you'll see her in quite a few of the early ones, including one of my favorites with the see right through to the pie plate there. But they knew they had to do more than just put women in ads and hope that women bought the glass. So they enlisted the help of home economists. And home ec had been kind of a growing cultural trend. And the women that they employed for this had a lot of influence in the society. It's really hard for me to imagine that, columnists and writers of cookbooks would have such huge audiences, but they did. And I guess it's similar to, social media influencers today. They just had millions of readers. Sarah Tyson Rohr was one of the main ones who was enlisted by Corning, and she was also one of the more famous ones. There was also Mildred Maddox Bentley and Harriet Ellsworth Coates, and all had big followings from women who read their columns or purchased their cookbooks or went to see their demonstrations. But Sarah Tyson Rohr was one of my favorites. She's just such a character. She didn't start cooking until she was 30, which I find remarkable, especially at the time, right? And it was only when a friend talked her into going to cooking class, supposedly, that she started to learn to cook. And then she got really passionate about cooking and about diets. And she was so opinionated, she got really especially passionate about how people were just doing it all wrong. So I think her opinions maybe helped elevate her, because she was so strong-willed, and so she was just very blunt. But she had hordes of people who showed up for her cooking demonstrations. I'll give you a couple of examples that were in an article on her. She was opposed to desserts. They were an unhealthy habit, but she was still demonstrate how to make them. One source quoted her as saying, while demonstrating the dessert recipe, "Under protest, I shall make for you some new desserts, which I hope none of you will think of imitating. Remember, desserts are both unhealthy and unnecessary as articles of food." And then she also refuted the idea that fish was brain food, saying that the fisherman of her acquaintance was not overly brilliant. And then my favorite is she famously refused to eat pork, saying, "I have no time to eat anything which takes 5 hours to digest." So, I mean, just a lot of fun. You can see on the left, Mrs. Rohr uses Pyrex exclusively. That's from that October 1915 Good Housekeeping ad that I showed you in the beginning. And then earlier that year in the New York Times, June 6th, you can see she was already demonstrating using Pyrex because Corning had hired her to do this. So she would demonstrate using these new Pyrex glass cooking utensils, and at the bottom it says, "These glass utensils on sale in the China store." So they would just be conveniently there, offered up right after this popular speaker was demonstrating their use. So it's pretty savvy marketing ploy, and Pyrex got a lot of, I think, people paying attention to its glass bakeware that maybe would not have if they hadn't used this technique. Another favorite character in the Pyrex stories for me was Evelyn Roberts, who was a research scientist at Corning from 1917 to 1920. And she is shown here on top of a rooftop of a Corning office building, pouring hot water. You can't really tell what it is, but it's a casserole that's stuck in a block of ice. So she's demonstrating the thermal shock resistant qualities of Pyrex. And that kind of image that they photographed her doing, that test, made it into some of the early ads. You'll see that from freezing to boiling without breaking, that came from the test that Evelyn Roberts was doing. She worked until 1920 at Corning, and then she went back to school at the University of Michigan and got her master's degree in physics. And she also published an article with Jessie Littleton on the annealing temperatures of glass in 1920. And she continued to work in industrial research all across the country in different places, although she didn't really work with glass again after she left Corning. But nobody really comes close to Lucy Maltby in terms of the influence on Pyrex. And there are a couple of really good authors, cultural historians who've written about this. Maltby was a home economist who in the 1920s wrote to Corning. She was kind of local. She lived in Mansfield, Pennsylvania. And she pointed out to them that some of their products really weren't very useful and had some major problems. And she noted that the sizes and shapes of them were not always the best for their function. And she thought that Corning would really benefit from getting some feedback from consumers to improve their products. And in the 20s, Pyrex was kind of suffering from a decline in sales. So they did a couple of things to try to improve that, including hiring an advertising agency, but also they hired Maltby in 1929 to manage a new consumer service department. And so Maltby launched Corning's first test kitchen in 1931. And the test kitchen eventually had up to 35 people working in it. So it was really a big endeavor. And this statistic just blows me away. When it was at its peak, the test kitchen received and answered 3,000 letters a week, which is a stunning number of letters to answer. Makes me feel like a whiner when I think about the number of emails that I have to answer and I complain about. So she and her staff tested every new product that was going out, as well as existing products, to make suggestions and design changes. And in the 1930s, so they were really involved in the design and the production of flameware. And according to Maltby's notes, test kitchen staff used 18,000 pounds of potatoes experimenting with flameware before the product was finally rolled out. So they did a lot of testing. And according to one of the history books on Corning, Generations of Corning, Maltby was so influential that the phrase, "What does Lucy think?" was a common response when suggestions for new products and designs were made. So here's another example of how we can see Maltby's influence. On the left is a cake pan which consumers had been complaining about not having handles, and their thumbs would get stuck in the batter, and they wouldn't fit 2 pans in an oven, so they couldn't do a double layer cake, and they couldn't use their box mix in it because it didn't have enough capacity. So there are some major complaints about it that they learned about by interviewing consumers and getting their feedback. And then on the right is a note talking about the pans and saying, Miss Maltby is absent because of the death which has occurred in her family. Therefore, I cannot check with her the dimensions, but the dimensions given on the drawings are correct because I know that Mr. Simmons has been working with her on this plan and assured me he had his sketches according to the dimensions recommended by Good Housekeeping Institute and other such organizations. So she was really involved in any design changes to the point that they had to reassure each other that, yes, Lucy Maltby has been checked on this. So I think it's a telling little note. She was kind of a marketing whiz too. She had the idea of using the test kitchen for more than just design and testing. She saw it as a way to train the sales force so that they would better be able to sell the products. So all the salesmen, there were mostly men at that time, had to take a training class in her kitchen. And these are obviously kind of publicity shots, but they all did have to learn how to boil water and boil an egg and make coffee and that kind of thing so that they could demonstrate those things reliably when they were selling the goods. But she also had demonstrations of cooking filmed in the test kitchen. So she used it as a way to market tools. She created cookbooks and recipes that they tested on the products so people could say, well, what can I make in my, glass cookware that will work really well? So these were recipes that were designed to work perfectly with the products that they made. So a lot of marketing tools were created that wouldn't otherwise have existed without Lucy Maltby in the test kitchen. And in her notes, she estimated in 1 week, her department's network created publicity for Pyrex products worth over $160,000 in magazines and newspapers alone. Another thing that she kind of instituted was a program that sent home economics field representatives out traveling all over the country, meeting with sales forces and stores and talking to radio show hosts and television program hosts and doing demonstrations and meeting with cooking editors and all kinds of different things. And these home economics field representatives like Ann McKell, who's represented here, she was the representative for the Dallas district, traveled all over the place promoting Pyrex and later other products. So this kind of consumer research approach was really solidly in place. And a lot of that was due to Lucy Maltby. This film, which was created in 1960, called American Women Partners in Research, kind of solidifies that. The importance of women in the design and sales process. It was narrated by Chet Huntley. I don't know if anybody remembers Chet Huntley, but it was very much a product of its time. So there are lots of, offensive kind of sexist things in there, but also it's just really amazing to me. It's a glimpse into this consumer feedback machine, really, that turned out all these products with the power of women's opinions mostly. And the engineers and designers who worked with them on improving these products. I'll show a little clip of it hopefully it will be loud enough. Sometimes it's hard. Let's see if I can get it. I don't think it's gonna be loud enough. For some reason. Well, sorry about that. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. This clip though, or this whole film is actually on YouTube. If you're interested in this kind of thing, it's really worth watching. And there's even some old footage of the Corning Glass Center and people going in where this opinion center was kept. If you search American Women Partners in Research, you'll find it right off the bat, and it's a lot of fun to watch. So sorry, chat that we couldn't enjoy your commentary. So, that's a lot of information. But I basically want to tell you also that you are more than welcome to use our research collections at the library. If you can't get here, we have interlibrary loan available. So if you go to your local library, we will lend books. We will scan articles and send them. You can visit us, like I said, to use the collections yourselves. We're open to the public. We have a virtual reference service, lots and lots and lots of digitized materials online, and a Pyrex research guide. So this is a screenshot of our digital collections, and you can see that under the popular topics is where Pyrex is listed right here. And then there's a screenshot of just one of the pages. I think I am going to get this wrong, but I want to say 600 or 700 objects digitized here, trade catalogs, advertisements, brochures, some photographs. I could be wrong about that. I think Lori's in the audience, so she might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. Then our virtual reference service, we have online. You can ask us questions. I'll just put a little caveat in here that as a nonprofit educational institution, we cannot answer questions about rarity or value. That's just not allowed for us. And then some questions are really, impossible to answer. Like we've had a lot of people ask us about really non-standard Pyrex, which probably came from experimentation in the factories. And these are not things that are listed in trade catalogs or listed in the literature, and there's really no documentation for them. So it's really, the best resources out there are probably collectors, not libraries. So there are some things that are hard for us to answer, but we're delighted to answer what we can. And you can see this is a list of Pyrex FAQs that we put up. So these are more commonly asked questions that we've put in answers to, and these are permanently up there. Like, we get a lot of people asking about the Pyrex all caps versus the Pyrex lower caps, that kind of thing. So we put an FAQ out there about that. And then to connect you with all these different tools is the Pyrex research guide. It has all these and more oral histories that are on YouTube where we interviewed people who worked in the factories. And, we gained a lot of information about Pyrex production from these oral histories prior to the exhibition. So there's a wealth of information there. If you're a real geek about Pyrex and you want to learn everything, those are great places to learn more. The trade secrets are in the oral histories. And then trade catalogs and advertisements, that's the link to that digitized collection that I was talking about earlier. And then here are the URLs, which I think Bill is going to or has already copied into the chat so that you don't have to write them down. But you have a link there to our Ask a Glass question service, our online catalog, which also includes our digital collections, our Pyrex research guide, and the museum's glass collection, which is where all my images of the glass came from. So you can also search if you wanted to see, like, how many snowflake pattern pieces we have. You could just put snowflake pattern or snowflake Pyrex into the glass collection and pull up all of those pieces. Some of them are photographed by our photographers, so they're really well lit and everything, and others, because it's such a huge collection, got just snapshots as they were brought into the collection. So there's a variety of quality of the photographs, but at least you'll be able to get a sense of what's there in the collection by using that browser and search facility. So that is my presentation. I thank you for your patience, and I'll be glad to answer any questions I can.
Thank you very much, Regan. I really enjoyed that. Before we get to people's good questions, which Bill's going to feed to you, one question which I hadn't thought of asking in my ignorance is where the word Pyrex came from, But before that, I have to ask you an inside question, because when we looked at your images the other day, you showed a couple. Now I looked away for just a minute tonight, and I don't think you showed this in a minute. What happened to those images of the Pyrex where you had those Jello things that had did you get rid of those?
Yeah, I did, just because I showed it to someone and they got kind of queasy. It was I thought, oh, I don't want to make it's dinner time. I don't want to make anybody sick. It was a Pyrex ad from the same World Kitchen, the collection that I showed you, the hammering Pyrex teacup
Yes.
or coffee cup, and they're promoting the storage dishes, and so they made all these really. In fact, they called it. I think they called it "Funky Foods" ad in their, unofficial title was that. And they had like a big, beautiful blue birthday cake decorated with shrimp on top of it. And then the grossest one for me was a green gelatin mold with chicken drumsticks in it. And then there was a,
They were like fried chicken drumsticks. They'd already been fried before they were put in the
yeah,
Jello. That was
and
so,
then the red snappers with s'mores on top. That was the other
yeah,
one.
that was
So
bad too. Okay, I
yeah.
just want to make sure I didn't, people, you should look for those or request them from your librarian.
If you have a strong stomach, I will be glad to send them to you.
There's some of the best Jello using Pyrex things I've ever seen. Okay, so back to, I'll let Bill ask a question, except for where does Pyrex come from, the word Pyrex?
I've heard two different stories. One is the first thing they made was a pie plate, so and they wanted to keep with the non-X part of it, so they did Pyrex. I've also heard PYR being fire, so it's thermal shock resistant, so they kind of played on the word and went with Pyrex. So I've heard both of those. The pie plate is the one I've heard more commonly.
Okay, so there's not some historical reference where a light bulb goes off and somebody documented and they copy wrote it or whatever.
Not that I have seen. Maybe somebody knows something I haven't seen. I definitely am not an expert on all things Pyrex. I'll put that out there right now before you start asking me questions.
Yeah, so maybe somebody in the audience knows, because Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you, but there are some really good questions here for you.
So one of the questions that came up, you mentioned World Kitchen. Could you say something about what World Kitchen is?
World Kitchen, I think it used to be Borden, and they purchased the consumer products division from Corning Incorporated in 1998. And that's pretty much what our, you know, um, aside from what World Kitchen gave us after that in their design and media records, that's kind of where, early 2000s is probably where we end our collection records. So World Kitchen had it for a while, and then I think it went to, did it go to Instant Brands, and which became Instant Pot? I don't know. I can't, it's moved hands a couple of times, so somebody probably knows better than I who has it right now, who's making it right now. I think it's Instant Pot maybe that has it currently. Corning got out of the consumer products division in 1998, and World Kitchen took over.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. So the first part of the presentation, you talked about the collection, and I don't remember what the woman's name was, but question was, did she use the pieces in the collection, or did she just collect them?
I don't know. I think she just collected them. I've only seen pictures of them in big stacks in, a storage space. So I don't know if she ever used any of them. I don't think I ever asked her that.
And you mentioned her manuscript. If you visit the Rakow Library, can you view the manuscript?
Yes.
So I was very interested in the little video where they used a cup to pound in the nail. And the reason is, when I was a kid, we had these Pyrex dishes, and my mom had sold them sometime before I was born. And she told that part of the demonstration was to pound in a nail and pull the nail out.
I believe it. strength was a huge selling point for several of their lines, and of course they made messware for the Army, and there are images of like people standing up on ladders and dropping cups and things like that. Harvey Littleton was a glass artist who was Jesse Littleton's son, and he was in the Army, and he said he made money. I don't know if this is true. This is just something I've heard. He made money off like making bets against people that they could break the messware, and if they threw it against a wall, and he won a lot of money because it wouldn't break. So
Wow. That's impressive.
And the exhibition, is that permanent or ongoing?
no, it was only up for a year. The Pyrex potluck site that we developed, that's the accompaniment to that exhibition, is still up. There's some outdated information on it because it was really built just for that exhibition. But there's still a lot of good information too. Like there's a pattern database that's really fun to look through, so you can do some searching there, and a lot of images. So it's still worth going to see. And that's linked from the Pyrex LibGuide, research guide.
Another question was, do we know the names of the artists and designers who made the Pyrex patterns?
What a great question. Sometimes we do. It's harder, and I'm sure, Margaret, the issue with this. It's just a lot of times that wasn't an important piece of information that was kept. We have tried to identify as many as we can, and in the glass collection database, if they know the designer, they put the designer in. So if you ever see, if you're in the glass collection database and you're like, oh, I know the designer for that, and it's not listed, please let us know. We'd love to add that information as we can find it.
And there is someone who wrote in here that it is Instant Pot renamed Instant Brands.
Oh, I got it backwards. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. I can never keep it straight.
Thank you, Lisa, for that information. Somebody has a specific question. This might be way too specific. They want to know if there is a moon deco casserole in the collection. Is that too obscure for you?
I have no idea.
I like the name of it, moon deco.
You'll be able to find it in the glass collection if there is.
Okay.
So you said that the exhibition is no longer up, but is it still possible to visit the collection, Diane's collection?
The library collection is accessible. Most of the glass is in our warehouse and storage because there's just so much of it. There are some pieces that are on display in our Crystal City Gallery, which is our local glass gallery. So you can see some pieces of it there. And then, of course, there are pictures of all of it online.
Oh, and there is a person here who says, thank you, Lori, that there is one listed. This is referring to the moon deco casserole, that there's one listed in the museum's collection.
That's my colleague, Lori. Thank you, Lori.
So here's a question. I assume there was a patent or many patents for the glassware. Did these patents expire? If the patents are expired, can World Kitchen only compete with the good Pyrex name and marketing?
This is a complicated question. I mean, the original patent expired. I don't even know. I think it was maybe the 30s or a little bit before. So they kept trying to reinvent things, make new changes. That's why flameware, one of the reasons flameware, aside from the fact that people kept trying to put their bakeware on top of the stove and it was breaking, and consumers were saying, don't you have something that, can go on top of our stoves? There was also the issue of, the patent for the original Pyrex had expired. And so other companies were able to make use of that. But the patent for the glass formula is very different from the brand name. The brand of Pyrex is a completely different thing, entity than the formulas. When Diane Williams was doing research at the corporate headquarters or archives, and this was back must have been in the 90s, she found there were over 150 different Pyrex formulations already. So, you know, the brand Pyrex has really very little to do with the formulation of the glass. For example, Flameware is not a borosilicate glass at all, but it was branded Pyrex. So I think that's a common confusion for people. And I don't know if I've answered the question. You know, it's not an area of expertise for me, but I've talked to a lot of the glass. I've talked to several glass engineers who worked in the different plants, and they said, oh, you know, even when Corning switched to soda lime for its clear, transparent glass, there were still some factories making borosilicate, and the brand didn't change. It's just the formulation changed, and it for the engineers, it had more to do with how expensive it was to retrofit their factories, or all kinds of different things. Like one of them said they made every kind of transparent glass out of soda lime except the 9x13 baking pan. They never made that out of borosilicate or of soda lime because it was too long and it didn't meet their quality standards. They could never get it to the right quality. So it's a complicated issue.
Okay, Bill, do you have more questions?
Yeah, there's a comment. Someone writes, my mother, grandmother, and aunts were home testers of Pyrex and Corningware.
There's also someone who's mentioned about that Canada recently, two collectors in Canada and researchers wrote a great article about Canadian Pyrex.
Oh.
Called All About Glass, which is the quarterly magazine from the Museum of American Glass, West Virginia, which you probably have in the Rakow library, now that I know 30 years later how to pronounce it correctly.
That's okay. Everybody pronounces that way, Margaret. We do have that publication, but I'll have to check it out because I haven't read that article. So that's great to know. Thank you.
So I have another comment from the person who asked the question about the patents, which I think I didn't read very well. He says, you answered my patent question perfectly. Thank you.
Oh, good, because that stuff makes me nervous. I don't even know what I'm talking about. So
And
well,
there's
somebody posted in the chat a picture of, I'm sorry, I'm obsessing about this, but the Moon Deco casserole, it's pretty awesome. I don't know, because everybody look at the chat because it's in there, but otherwise you should Google it. So
some great pieces. I mean, it's really fun. I mean, I'm not a collector. I have to admit, when we were doing the exhibition, I did go to some secondhand stores and buy some things, and then kind of, like I didn't continue to buy them, but I love my pieces, so they're great.
So is there a ballpark estimate of how many pattern collections Pyrex has released?
Oh, I mean, the collector's books will tell you. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue. Maybe somebody in the audience knows, but people have definitely counted. It depends on like whether you're talking about the standard or the promotional, or they're different. And then there's all, like I said, the experimental pieces that just show up on the secondhand market. And it's like, whoa, where did this come from? This is not anything that was in a trade catalog. And I talked to someone who worked at the main plant, and he said there used to be this shop in Corning that was owned by a family who had someone who worked in the main plant, and they like had all this experimental Pyrex. And he's like, I think that's how it all got out onto the market. But it wasn't anything that was ever documented. It was just like, well, let's try this pattern, or people would just test things out. So
yeah, I kind of remember going into the store at the Glass Museum, and there were kind of oddball patterns that I just assumed they'd tried out and they didn't really catch on. So
that could be, I don't know. This was like a secondhand store, which, I told this story to someone, they were like, what's the address for that? I'm like, oh no, that's long gone. But yeah.
Was the Fire King part of the Pyrex brand?
Fireside, Fire King, I think it was a different brand.
A different company?
I think so.
Okay.
Does anybody know the answer for that for sure? I could look it up, but I think it was a different company.
I think
I
that
think
that's
it's a
correct.
different company.
And
Yes.
we're kind of used up our hour. So I'll just ask, oh, somebody commented that Anchor Hawking is Fire King. Are there any Pyrex coffee table books?
You know, there should be. There really should be. It's so gorgeous. I don't know. Has anybody seen any? I haven't seen any like true coffee table books. There are websites that are great. I don't know.
Somebody wants to know whether Pyrex shatters. If you
Um,
drop a Pyrex casserole or something, something happen to it? Anybody done that? I've seen, I think, broken ones when people have gotten them in the mail and someone's packed them wrong and people are grumpy about it on Facebook or something, but um,
I mean, I think it just depends on
it's not Corelware. Corelware shatters.
it does, yeah.
So,
It depends on what you do to it. That's what you're.
I don't know. I mean, I guess there's just too many types of Pyrex to make any kind of statements about it.
I think that's true.
So
Well,
another comment is that there's some good books at the Corning Museum of Glass Store.
Oh, I should have said that.
and I'll bet they can browse all the books that are on reserve in your library about Pyrex.
Yes, but probably online at the shops is easier.
Probably. And someone says here, my movers prove that Pyrex mixing bowls break.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Well, there's more out there. So I think we'll wrap it up. If anybody has any final questions, this is your chance to put it in the chat and get that burning question answered. No pun intended here. Otherwise, we're going to thank you very much, Regan. I really enjoyed this. I love the ads. But next time when you come back for part 2 of Pyrex, I want to see those fried chicken legs in the Jello.
You are a very brave
I want
woman,
all of you to
Margaret.
be contacting Rakow Library and specifically Regan Brumagen to ask her for images of the fried chicken legs in Jello in a Pyrex bowl.
Okay, you got it. Thank you, everybody, and thank you,
Thank you so
Margaret.
much. Really loved
Appreciate
it.
it. All right. Good night,
Good night,
everyone.
everybody.